Heating and AC test 12. And who knows the answer to the first one? Technician A says you should. See, this is going to sound like the previous test, but it's not. It's got different questions when you get in there a little bit. Now, why that particular chapter was structured with some of the same questions to begin with, there's a couple of questions that are actually the same. I think that was an error. Technician A says you should begin an HVAC problem diagnosis with thorough inspection. Technician B says you can determine from the inspection what type of system you're dealing with.
I'd say they're both right.
Yeah, both those guys are right. We did this question here, I think, last week, but keep going. Technician A says oily residue on a fitting or hose can indicate a refrigerant leak. Technician B says this residue will not affect the leak detector. Now, we haven't seen that question before. That's A only, right? And I will tell you, leak detectors, you can have a refrigerant system that's losing its refrigerant every 2 days. And when you finally find the leak, if you pressure it up with nitrogen and put soapy water on it, it will be making a bubble about 1/8 of an inch in diameter and popping about every 45 seconds or a minute. That's why some of the AC leaks are so doggone hard to find. And in some cases, after you've gone and looked everywhere, the dye helps a lot. Occasionally you'll have one that whenever we actually had one time, it was a Buick that was leaking. Every 3 months, the refrigerant would get gone out of it. And we would charge it up, and 3 months later, it would come back. So we put a bunch of dye in it, and we looked and looked and looked and looked until we were blue in the face. And then lo and behold, Frank, the guy that was working on it, noticed that the evaporator drain was dripping a bunch of dye-colored water. So we had an evaporator we had to change out. You see what I'm saying? So that's how you're going to locate on that.
I had to do that too. They ended up finding it with the leak detector.
Did you have a good time?
No.
All right. In a system that's operating correctly, were you looking for the stapler? No, you're looking for a place to sit down. Okay. In a system that's operating correctly, the lines and hoses on the high side should be what? Hot to the touch. You've done that before, right? Technician A says pressure checks are one method of diagnosing AC problems. Technician B says trouble trees are used only for mechanical problems. Who's right about that?
A.
A is that. Your trouble trees are fairly handy. I will tell you that they'll point you in the right direction. Typically, we even made our own trouble tree up here for general AC diagnostics. However, there are some of the boxes on our homemade trouble tree that you could expand and go a little bigger. You remember the trouble tree I'm talking about that we homemade? Did you keep it on your phone or what? Okay. When discussing a manifold gauge set, Technician A says the high side service hose is blue. Technician B says the low side service pressure gauge goes up to 750. Does either one of those guys know what they're talking about?
No.
No, they do not. Technician A says the manifold gauge set for R12 can be used on all systems. Is he right? Technician B says R134A systems use service ports with metric flare threads. Who's right about that?
I don't know.
Neither one of them. Neither one of those guys are right. On a system that uses service valves, the valve is kept in which position for normal operation? On a system that uses service valves, and what they're talking about is on some of the older systems, there were valves that were kind of like a faucet handle right there on the compressor where the line's hooked up to the compressor, and they had a square. Like if you imagine yourself taking the faucet handle off and you got a little square there, right? On this particular one, before you ever did anything, the cool thing about these is you could turn those valves off and you could take the lines off the compressor and replace the compressor without ever evacuating the system.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
But that was ages ago. This was 70s stuff, man. This was compressors that had a little crankshaft and pistons in it. I mean, it was ancient history stuff. I had a F-150 one time it was a 74 model, and I put another compressor on it. Built a bracket, put a compressor on there, ran another belt to the compressor off the existing compressor because it had a 2-groove pulley in it. And I actually put a little Freon tank and air hose under there so that I could turn a switch, turn on that compressor, and it was an air compressor. And you could air up a tire with it or something. Pretty handy. I thought when I put it on there, I'll never use this, but I used it about 10 times a week. It just blew me away how handy it was when I put it on there. Anyway, long and short of it is, that's what they were talking about. These things are these valves that you have on some of the older ones like that. You'll see the little square thing sticking out of the line right there where it goes into the compressor is coming out there. And number 7 is A, basically. It's kept in the back seated position for normal operation. In other words, you want it to be open so that the refrigerant will be able to travel from the compressor through the lines on that. I don't even know why that question's on here, because it's sort of old school stuff. And if we got an R12 system, we're always going to convert it to 134 anyway, because R12 is so dadgum expensive and hard to get nowadays. Although some people have got some of that stuff stockpiled, you know. An R12 system is shut off, the ambient temperature is 70 degrees. The evaporator pressure should be about
600.
yeah, it's about, you know, you're going to say D, believe it or not. See, on R12, pressure and temperature almost directly correlate in that regard. But I will tell you this, though, on most systems out there now, you cannot abide by, and I've said this before, you can't abide by the static pressure to tell if anything's going on. You may have one that's not cooling worth a flip, you know, and it's barely blowing cool at all. Here's one dead giveaway. If they say it cools well at night, but it doesn't cool well in the daytime, you got me? Suspect low refrigerant. In other words, you may get in it if it's a cool part of the day, like, you know, like let's say that, you know, somebody brings it by your house, your buddy comes by and says, hey, fill my air conditioner. So you turn it on and, you know, kind of cool at night. You turn it on, well, it feels like it's doing pretty good to me. Well, in the heat of the day, if it doesn't do worth a flip, you're typically going to be low on refrigerant and all that. And here's another thing that you're going to need to know. And remember, before you guys get done, I want everybody in here to be ESCO certified. You got that? Mm-hmm. Doesn't cost much. Good for you to do it. Gives you a certification, something you can put in your pocket and carry with you. And it makes it legal for you to work on air conditioners at a shop. Everybody needs it. You know what I mean? Remember when I had Moody show you his card? That's a card you can carry in your wallet. Anybody in here I'll show you which website to go through. I think I've got it actually bookmarked on that machine over there. It costs $12. It'll say they're charging you $20, but it's only $12 they charge you. All right. But what I started to say was, on AC nowadays, you notice how when we take our lines loose from the doggone car, when we screw these little thing out, there's no refrigerant that comes whistling out of our hose. You notice that? And the reason is because you're required to, within 12 inches of the end of your hose, have a shut-off valve. And they said these got shut-off valves on it. Now, the ones on our gauge set, they don't have shut-off valves. So you got to do different procedures on that. Because, see, if you just take one of those off, a lot of times, well, I say it does have a shut-off valve too, so when you take them off, that sort of blocks it. But in the olden days, it would go whoosh, come out of there. I saw a guy servicing a central unit in a house the other day. And I just happened to be standing there when he was servicing the central unit, long story. And when he took his gauges off, all of the stuff just from his gauges just went whoosh. That's not supposed to happen. And he had a nice new gauge set too. But it's supposed to have a shut off. So it'll be trapped there at the gauges, you know what I mean? All right, so, but anyway, in most R12 systems that use an STV, what is that? Short-term variables. That's a suction throttling valve. Do you remember on the Cadillac, on the left side over there, there is actually, in the suction line, there's a great big valve about this long. It was a strange looking thing that you don't ever see hardly. And it had a little line going to the side of it. That's a suction throttling valve. In most R12 systems that use a suction throttling valve, the normal low side pressure should be about what? 28 to 30.
28 to 30.
Don't get that wrong if you see it under final. Number 10, high side pressure is affected by what? Ambient temperature, refrigerant charge level, or fan clutch operation?
All of them.
All of these. Somebody turn that air conditioner down a little bit over there, and let's cool it off in here a bit. Somebody, Brian, go turn the air conditioner down over there. Just bump the temperature down so they'll come on. It's a little hot in here. I'm starting to feel forehead sweat, and I do not even like that. All right. And close that door, too.
It was
Sir?
hot yesterday, too.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
Yes, it was.
I was outside skateboarding, and it was very hot.
Well, if you're skateboarding, it's going to feel hot even when it's cold.
It was hot.
A faulty AC system has a high low side pressure and a high side pressure. Technician A says that the system is probably starved. Technician B says the system has a bad thermostatic switch. Which technician is correct?
B.
Neither one. What can be used to locate refrigerant leaks?
Flame
Close that door
tester.
over there, Adam.
Any of these?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it says any of these, but I don't use a flame top tester anymore. Imagine what happens here. You know what a flame top tester is? You got a propane torch, and you got a little hose that's coming off of it, and you basically got a little, the flame is actually burning up here in what looks like a little bucket thing with a hole in the side of it on the top of your propane torch. And you got this long hose, and when you go down through there, if you draw any refrigerant in there, that flame turns green, right? Well, what if some yo-yo has charged your refrigerant with propane or something?
Just gonna say propane.
That is not a good plan. I mean, so don't use a flame tester. Like some of these, this is a new textbook, but the questions are old. So we don't use flame trap test. Anyway, if you want to get that one right, put D. The engine should be what when the engine checks for leaks?
Or when the technician checks it.
When the technician checks for leaks, huh?
Running.
It should not be running.
Okay.
Here's something else. You got one that's got a kind of a slow leak you're looking for, turn the doggone car off, charge it up with refrigerant, turn it off, and leave it sitting all night long with no fans blowing on it. And when you're checking for leaks, turn off your fan. If you got fans blowing your leak away, you're not going to find it anyway. Leave it sit all night long. It's going to settle in the low areas, okay? Because it's heavier than air. That's the way that kind of thing works. All right, Technician A says the system should be operated after injecting fluorescent dye into it. Technician B says that wearing yellow tinted goggles can help you find the dye traces, and this also protects your eyes. Which technician is correct about that?
Oh,
Both of them. Both high side pressures and low side pressures are low with the engine running, and the selector set to the higher and to the air conditioning position. Technician A says, remember that, both of them are low. Technician A says the system is undercharged. Technician B says the cooling fan could be inoperative. Which technician is correct? A is correct. I'll tell you something else. If you've got low on both sides, you can have a clogged up expansion valve too. The discharge air temperature is warm and the pressure gauges are shown to represent, what's most likely thing if you've got pressure gauges that are looking like this?
D. Low on refrigerant.
What do you think? Everybody like that question? Typically low on refrigerant if they're low across the board. That's typical. Discharge air temperature is warm or slightly cool. Pressure gauges shown to represent most likely cause. What? We're going to show some more gauges. Let's show some more gauges.
No, I'm gonna say it's lack of airflow to the condenser.
Very good, Bobby. Believe it or not, some of these Volkswagens have actually got little temperature thermistors measuring the register.
Some dudes outside.
Go get them. They're measuring the register temperature. If the register temperature is measured to be too low by these Volkswagen system, then you're going to have issues with the AC. Yeah, what you guys need?
I need a thing to plug a tire with. You got one?
A thing to plug a tire with. You can buy that at a parts store. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't typically supply that kind of thing. Now, sometimes we'll break one down and fix it for you if we're in a good mood. You know what I'm saying? But I mean,
I got a screw the size of my pinky on a tire.
yeah, well, you're not going to be able to plug it. That needs to be took off and fixed. Is it a great big ugly tractor tire or something? Like on a jacked up truck? Or is it, it's not? All right then.
235.
Well, what we need to do, come see me after lunch and maybe have somebody break down and fix it for you.
Okay.
All right then. Always something. Okay, the customer states the vehicle doesn't cool as well as it should. Technician A says the system could be low on charge. B says a non-functional radiator cooling fan could cause a lack of cooling inside the vehicle.
Oh,
Both of those, because if it's not pulling air across that condenser, you got issues. A high side pressure is higher than normal. Technician A says the compressor may be defective. Technician B says the condenser may be clogged with leaves or other debris blocking the airflow.
D.
Now let me talk about them leaves and dog fennels and stuff. They'll go right through the condenser and they'll stop in front of the radiator and they cause the same problem. So if you look in there in the front and you say, I don't see anything, well, when you take the radiator loose and pull it back away from the condenser, you may find it completely clogged up with fuzzy crud. Seen that a bunch of times. And it'll cause the AC not to work right, it'll cause the engine to overheat. So don't overlook something obvious or that should be obvious, just always pay attention to that radiator.
That's D.
Yeah. Which one are we headed? Which one was that?
19.
19, yeah, 19 is actually gonna be B, technician B only. And the air compressor would be a defective for that. An automotive air conditioning system is being tested for lack of cooling complaint. Both high and low pressures are higher than normal. Technician A says system's low on charge. Technician B says the system is overcharged.
B.
That's going to be B. Two technicians are discussing leak testing of an AC system. Also, to be careful not to put too much oil in there because that'll coat things and make it not work too. Two technicians are discussing leak testing of an air conditioning system. Technician A says to check the evaporator for leaks at the condensate drain tube. Technician B says the water will not damage the electronic leak tester probe. Who's right about that? A only. In an operating AC system, the outlet line from the evaporator should be what? From the evaporator. That's the big one coming out of the bulkhead. Come on, Joe.
Should be cool.
Should be cold.
Cross cover?
No, just cool. Actually, I would say cool. I'd say cold, but cool is the answer they're wanting. Okay, we're getting close here. If both the low side and the high side show low readings, what might be the problem?
Low refrigerant charge or leaks.
Yep. And I'm telling you, I've seen the thermal expansion valve cause that. Clogged thermal. One time we had one of them dadgum things on a Toyota Camry, and it had high and low side pressures, even though it was fully charged. And it wasn't cooling worth a flip at all. And so I had Jesse pull the dash out of there and put a expansion valve in there. Because typically that's what it is. You know, your orifice tube can be clogged too. But in this particular case, it didn't change anything. So I pulled the evaporator out of there and I, just blew through it to see what was there, and I didn't see anything in there. But we put an evaporator on and fixed it. And I was, all the pressure normalized and we had good air. I don't know why. I can't explain it all the time. There's one guy that I was talking to years ago. He said, in my shop, if I've done everything else I can possibly think of on the refrigerant side, and I can't figure out why it's not running right, why it's not doing right, I put an evaporator in it, and usually that fixes it. I don't know if that's a good strategy, but it worked for him. Regulations require any shop performing AC work to have what?
Certified personnel.
Certified personnel. That'll keep them from, both A and B. You're supposed to have refrigerant recycling equipment and certified personnel. Now, the way the rules are written, you do not have to be certified to fix your buddy's air conditioner. Like if, your buddy next door says, hey, can you come charge my AC? It's not okay to vent refrigerant into the atmosphere. You can't do that legally no matter what. You don't ever do that. But you can pull the air out of it and put refrigerant in there as long as you don't charge them anything. You know what I mean? You got me? I mean, you don't even have to be certified. If you charge anything, you better be certified. If they even give you a pack of pork chops, so that's the way the rules are written. You got me?
So there's no way around the rules.
No, Joe. You even think about that. If somebody throws you a rule, is the first thing that pops into your head, how can I beat this?
Not exactly.
Yeah.
But thing where you can't get pork chops out of the other, that's not payment. That's just you're feeding me.
Yeah,
It's
well.
a favor. It's a favor for.
Yeah, I know, but the EPA guy in the sky, he's watching with his satellite cameras, and he sees your fuzzy head, and he knows what you got pork chops for this. Aha! He charged up this guy, see, and they hand him pork chops. Brrr! Although if his exo certified, you just pull that out and they go, oh well, it's okay then. All right then. After an AC system's been repaired, it can be checked for leaks before charging using what?
So I almost want to say all of them.
Wait a minute. After it's been repaired, before charging.
Yeah.
Well, you can use soap bubbles, but you got to juice it up with dry nitrogen. You can use an electronic leak detector, but can you use that if you haven't charged it up yet?
No.
What about dye injection? If you hadn't charged it up yet,
Haven't charged that
can't
yet.
do that, so you got to have a vacuum pump. However, what's the weakness of that method?
Vacuum pump.
All you're doing is you're putting atmospheric pressure. You're taking the pressure out of the inside. You got atmospheric pressure out here. 30 inches of vacuum in here equals 14 and a half whatever out here. Got it? That ain't really very good, is it? It may not leak vacuum, but when you charge it up, you're going to have 350 pounds on some of those lines. It's going to leak. It can leak with a really high pressure inside the line. The differential between 350 and atmosphere is a lot, and it can leak there even if it wasn't leaking vacuum. Okay, what test is being performed in this illustration here? This illustration.
A, an evaporator tester.
You like that answer? Evaporator temperature test. And how do you know this?
Because there's a digital thermometer right there.
Well, it's not that, the other three didn't sound right. at
Wait a
all.
minute, where is your digital thermometer connected?
And it's
The
out.
evaporator?
This is actually a subcooling test for a thermal expansion valve system.
Dadgummit.
Okay, mark it wrong and slap yourself. That's how you do that. Okay. And make doggone sure that you guys start cranking out some of these worksheets, because we don't want to, we're sort of slacking off a little bit on the lab work stuff, so you guys got time. Now, I can't fault the Adams family over here, because they've been really busting their fanny on this F-150, and they're doing a great job of it. Taking a while to do it, but they're staying in there. Staying in the fight until they win, right?